On November 8th, 2023, Gearbox held a livestream for the 10-year anniversary for Risk of Rain, and in this livestream they detailed their plans for Risk of Rain 2, a new DLC called Seekers of the Storm. This was also the same day that Survivors of the Void was ported to consoles and Risk of Rain Returns released. A very good time to be a Risk of Rain fan. However, the DLC wouldn't release for another year, releasing on August 27th, 2024, and to say it was a mess would be an understatement.
What a wonderful day at Gearbox HQ. I sure hope nothing goes wrong today while I work on the next DLC.
Hey, so Randy just called.
Yeah, what's up?
He wants the code base to be the same between console and PC,
Okay, so,
and an engine upgrade,
that's
and he
possible.
wants it out in 4 months.
What?
Don't ask me, it's just what he wants.
He does know that this isn't feasible, right? This isn't gonna go over well.
Upon release, people very quickly found out that this DLC not only released with most of the items being useless and the survivors being wildly imbalanced, but also released with an insane amount of bugs that only got worse the more you looked into it. Game logic was suddenly tied to frame rate, Mithrix being immortal if you dared to pick up one of the new items, and Xbox save data getting corrupted, among many more issues. This was supposed to be another Survivors of the Void style expansion, and what we got was a fraction of the content that DLC launched with, and a vast majority of the content that launched with Seekers either didn't work or was complete garbage, not to mention them completely breaking the base game as well. The ensuing wave of backlash was immense and mostly deserved, but there's one saving grace from this period. The brand lead for Risk of Rain under Gearbox, Preston. Preston hopped in the Discord pretty fast after release and began talking to the community over the next few days, assuring that the feedback was being passed to the development team. To their credit, they did manage to get their first patch out roughly a week and a half after launch that solved a bunch of major problems while admitting the actual DLC content wasn't up to expectations. We'd get a few more patches leading up to version 1.3.5, the final version of what I like to call Seekers 1.0. The speed of these updates were pretty impressive, but it wouldn't be enough to just fix the bugs and call it a day. But what does the DLC actually introduce into the game, and why was it considered to be so bad? To start off, the survivors were considered underwhelming. Seeker is the default survivor that you unlock by purchasing the DLC and was probably the most polished upon release. Her only bad parts were simply the cause of the rest of the game being in the state it was in. Nothing was really broken with her specifically. She comes with a passive ability called Tranquility, which gives stat increases and buffs to her attacks with every stack, capping at 7 stacks. Spirit Punch is a simple 3-hit projectile attack, with the first 2 piercing enemies and the third being a giant orb that explodes on impact. Her secondaries were either Unseen Hand, which lets you summon a giant fist from the ground that heals for a set percentage of health, or Soul Spiral, which summons orbs that would orbit the player and deal constant damage to anything they touched, granting barrier on every hit. Sojourn is her utility and is very similar to Volcanic Egg, putting you inside an orb that makes you invulnerable to damage, but the twist here is that it slowly damages you over time in exchange for dealing more damage when you hit a target. Common Synergy was using Soul Spiral with this ability, allowing the player to deal easy damage to bosses while maintaining enough health to stay in the ability. Finally, her abilities end with Meditate, a quick time event that, while good at first, gets riskier to use as the run progresses. This is how you interact with Tranquility, with each successful activation granting 1 stack in the 7th, and only the 7th, reviving dead allies. I think on launch she was missing some visual feedback, but once patch 135 hit, she was definitely the most polished of the 3 survivors added. Chef is the returning survivor for this DLC, and this might have been the worst survivor to ever hit this franchise. He has Chef's Kiss as his passive, which makes enemies drop an item that heals for 8% health if you kill them with 2 skills. Dice is the worst and most ineffective primary I've ever seen in this game. You threw cleavers and you could hold them in place, but their hitboxes weren't active, meaning there's basically no point holding them. They also had charges with cooldowns, meaning you'd very often go without your primary if you had more than 2 enemies swarming you. The cleavers could also just disappear if you didn't recall them, which was fun. It was overall just a very janky primary to use, but things only get worse from here. Seer had incredibly short range, forcing you into melee territory with a non-melee survivor, locked you out of doing basically anything else with a long animation, and didn't even allow you to aim it properly. Roll wasn't really that bad initially, but for some reason charging it didn't increase your speed or duration, with the charge only increasing the damage of the attack. The charge above it was kinda slow, but overall it wasn't too bad. Glaze is the default special for Chef, and instead of being a movement ability like the first game, they decided to change it to just shoot a few blobs of oil. This is a problem that I'll touch on when we get to the Chef rework, because this design decision comes back to bite this character in the ass. The alternative special is Yes Chef, which is basically just second helping from the original. Dice still throws out a bunch of cleavers around you, Glaze now shoots out flaming balls of oil, and Roll now applies bleed. The problem with this move is that taking it removes any possibility of creating oil, which sucks when oil feels so integral to Seer and just Chef's kit in general. Chef is not only the most jank survivor, but also just not very fun or good. His kit feels incoherent with itself and is far too limiting compared to the rest of the game. False Sun is the secret survivor and is probably the most overtuned of the DLC survivors. He was missing a lot of feedback and visuals at launch, as well as his animations looking super jank, but was fixed in the patches that followed launch. His passive is Lunar Tampering, which gives attack speed and armor for every unused spike, and gives movement speed and health regen for every used spike. This is a really unique system that is really solid both on paper and in execution, and I hope they keep up the creativity of it with future survivors. Club of the Forsaken is an interesting primary because it has the standard attack, but if you press the secondary button while holding down the attack, you start charging up a slam attack that has no cooldown and does a lot of damage. This move is super busted because it does 1500% damage and has a proc coefficient of 3.0, which was just insanely overtuned. This invalidated the base melee because of how easy and spammable it was, as well as the base melee feeling like the particle effects and hitboxes were completely disjointed. Lunar Spikes is the secondary skill and is the core of his kit. These introduce two new mechanics: Lunar Ruin, which makes anybody inflicted with it take 10% more damage and have reduced healing, and Growth, which gives you more lunar spikes the more health you gain, making health increasing items even more important on this character, and finally gives Bison Stake an actual use outside of being free scrap. Step of the Brothers is a standard dash that has two charges. I think the cooldown could be reduced, but other than that, it's pretty normal. Finally, he comes with two specials: Laser of the Father, which is a standard laser attack that gains durations from Stack of Growth, and Laser Burst, which gains stock from growth and refills 30% of your lunar spike charges. Laser of the Father is a lot more powerful than Burst, which is a shame because I think both are good options, even if one is significantly more busted. Seekers of the Storm adds 18 new items, and for the most part, they're complete garbage. A lot of them relied on taking damage to have some sort of effect, which is not ideal when enemies can do over half your health in one hit more often than you'd be comfortable with. Add on the sloppy implementation of these items, and they were not received very well. Starting off with the common items, we have Antler Shield. This item had a 55% chance to reflect 10% of the damage taken to your attacker. I don't have to explain why this is bad, do I? In a game where enemies have far more health than they do damage, having a chance to reflect a tiny portion of their damage is absurd, especially when we have something like Razor Wire, an uncommon item that always procs when you take damage and does more damage. Next up is Bolstering Lantern, which is basically an inverse delicate watch. When you fell below 50% HP, you'd gain 20% damage. Living below 50% HP is not something you'd really want to do, considering you'd be in range of breaking your watches, or even worse, flat out dying if you didn't have any power elixirs to save yourself. 20% isn't even worth risking your life for, considering watches are also a 20% buff and only require you to stay above 25% HP. Chronic Expansion gives a 10% damage buff for every 5 enemies defeated, and is honestly one of the better items. The problem with this one is the fact that by the time you build up the bonus, you're typically leaving combat, and I've had times where this item has done nothing for me because of the enemy drought that can happen early on. Although, pairing this item with an FMP does give you infinite damage as long as you have permanent uptime on your FMP, which was really funny. When activated, Warped Echo would split the damage taken in half, with it dealing one half immediately and delaying the other half for 3 seconds. This was poorly implemented at first, leading to problems with enemies having this item, but wasn't too bad once it got fixed. Its main problem was just the way it handles the split. It's a pretty good idea of delaying damage, but it could be done a lot better, especially given that it doesn't give any sort of damage resist on that hit. Finally, we end off the common items with Knockback Fin. This item has a 7.5% chance to knock enemies into the air. That's it. No bonus damage on their targets, nothing. Why does it exist? Who thought this was a good idea? The uncommons start off with Chance Doll, which is another one of the few good items that were introduced. It gave chance friends a 40% chance to give a higher rarity item. Outside of just having a very poor indicator on when it actually worked, this item was pretty good, just a little unclear. Next up is Luminous Shot, which upon use of your secondary would buff the next shot from your primary by 150%, storing 5 charges. This item is just very clunky to use in general, with you basically needing backup mags to take full advantage of this item. It's among the middle of the pack while not being super terrible, but it's not super good either. Noxious Thorn is another one of the take damage to make thing happen items, with it having a 25% chance to spread 2 stacks of bleed to nearby enemies when you take damage. Very underwhelming, and again, taking damage to make a thing happen isn't really great item design. Plus, all that for 2 stacks of bleed? Really? Luckily, the next 2 items aren't nearly as bad, starting with Prayer Beads. This item stores 20% of gained experience into it, and upon being removed from your inventory, it will give you the stats. It is literally free stats, the item. Who would say no to free stats? It had the same problem as Chance Doll, where it wasn't super clear what it did, but it otherwise was a very good item. The next item is possibly the best item introduced with this DLC, the ever-beloved Sales Star. It gives you an extra item on the first chest spot per stage, with it able to drop multiple items from one chest if you have enough stacks. This item is perfect. There's never been any bad feedback or function with it. It's literally free items, the item. Immediate top tier item. Unfortunately, the next item does not bring me this level of joy. In fact, it brings the opposite, complete and total despair. Unstable Transmitter is an item that would teleport you to a random location if your health reached 25% or below. Now, why does this item bring such despair? Well, one time it teleported me out of my cover and directly into the False Sun's laser attack, ending a really good run. Sure, it protected watches and elixirs, but the random teleportation was a complete detriment to the player more often than not. I just don't understand why this item made it in. Being forcefully yanked from one spot to another can be good in theory, maybe, but in execution it was more of an annoyance than a benefit. The legendary items start off with Electric Boomerang, which is a pretty alright item. It's an on-hit item that fires, get this, an electric boomerang that deals 120% damage and stuns enemies. It had a bug where if you held the Salmering equipment, it would cause the electric boomerang to inflict bleed, which was a fun interaction. Other than that, it's a fairly standard item that didn't have any problems, just a fun bug. Growth Nectar was intended to be the opposite of Deathmark, where if you have 5 or more buffs, you'd gain 20% bonus stats. This item is a good idea, but, say it with me, had sloppy implementation. Runic Lens is an item that had the description of all time. I remember when I sat down to actually read this description, I felt my head start to explode. Why is it so wordy? The item is so painfully simple, but the way it's worded is just overcomplicated as hell. The game states overspill as a thing, but it doesn't have a defined definition like other blue text. It's just overspill. Thank you, Gearbox. Very cool. The next item is a lot more concise, thankfully, but also one of the most busted items of the entire game, only second to Sales Star. Sonorous Whispers is the reincarnation of the 56-leaf clover from the first game, and oh boy does it just allow infinite loot. It gave elites a 15% chance to drop an item on death and guaranteed an item from boss tier enemies. Meaning in the later stages of your run, where the only enemies you're fighting are elites and bosses, the floor is just covered in loot, to the point of it being slightly annoying at times. I believe this item to be weaker than Sales Star simply because Sales Star is always useful in any run no matter what, where this item does rely on you looping enough to encounter elites / bosses to get use out of it. This item dropped in a non-loop run, I wouldn't be mad per se, but it definitely wouldn't serve me as much. We finally end off the legendaries with the most laughable inclusion, War Bonds. You ever heard of Gore's Tome? That's basically this item, but instead of enemies dropping nuggets of gold, you're granted this gold when you start a new stage, and that's it. It's so laughably bad, it makes me wonder how it made it into the game at all in this state. 75 gold. Really? Yeah, it scales, but just, it's not that good. This DLC only added one equipment, that being Seed of Life. This item has two uses. One of them is basically a Dios, and once used it becomes a healing equipment, with it dropping little healing orbs that heal 2% of your max health. We also got a lunar item in Long-Standing Solitude, which converts all gold to experience, instead giving you a free unlock every level up. Combine this with something like Roll of Pennies and Brittle Crown to completely out-level the enemies, even within a standard 5-stage run. The enemies introduced in this DLC are very hit or miss, mostly misses. The child is a returning enemy from the first game and shoots orbs at you while teleporting around the map. It's a bit annoying, but it's not really a bad enemy, especially compared to Scorchworms. Oh my god. Scorchworms. These enemies are the worst enemy in the game because they can just not come out of the ground sometimes. It also feels like they do way more damage than they should, leading to a lot of unfair deaths. Speaking of unfair deaths, the final new enemy is the Halcyonite, which is just laughably bad. The laser only locks in on your position once, so if you avoid the first laser in the burst, then you're fine. They can also often get stuck on the geometry of the stage. The damage on the sword attack feels a little overtuned, but other than that, it's a fine enemy that just needs some tweaks. The DLC added a new boss, False Sun, and it is a fight. Ever. It's better than Voidling, not that that's a high bar or anything, but wow, it is not that good. The build up to the fight is really cool, if a little frustrating at times. Scaling the Prime Meridian while being assaulted by the lunar spikes is really cool. However, the fight suffers from janky telegraphs, the arena basically has no cover, and False Sun has no adaptive armor, so he falls over in 3 seconds. The way you access this fight is going through the green portals, which take you on the path of the Colossus, and I think the implementation of this doesn't really feel that great. Instead of the stages going in the regular rotation, the new DLC stages, minus Shattered Abodes and Helmeth Hatchery, are exclusive to the path of the Colossus. Not to mention the new Stage 1 that was added in the Devotion update, and the stage pool is all out of sync. Whereas it used to have 3 maps per stage minus stage 5. Now we have 5 different stages you can get on stage 1, and you have to go out of your way to interact with the new ones. What's worse is that once you defeat False Sun, you can never enter the Seeker stages again. I understand why we can't go to Prime Meridian, but you're telling me we can't at least go to Reformed Altar or Treeborn Colony? Especially when Colony is one of the few maps to have an exclusive variant only found by looping? I think having the separate path is fine because it at least guarantees you can always access the False Sun boss, but I think they could just add these maps into the rotation while keeping the green portal functionality. If you want to guarantee you go straight to False Sun, you can still interact with the green portal on stage 1 and guarantee you get put on the path of the Colossus, but you can also randomly spawn on one of the new DLC stages if you don't. Finally, Seekers added 2 new elite types in Gilded and Twisted. Both of these are horrible. Gilded elites would occasionally steal gold from the player, which would strengthen their shield. It's not nearly as annoying, but it could still be frustrating given how it forces you to disengage with the enemy at arbitrary points, but it doesn't compare to the Twisted elites. Who designed this? Imagine a Celestine elite, but instead of cloaking, it made every enemy in the radius reflect the damage they take. I don't know if the damage was boosted at all, but there would be some stages where a Twisted Elite would spawn and it would just be all over because your AoE would hit the protected enemies and just kill you instantly. This was never a good implementation because, sure, early on you can mostly decide when you damage an enemy, but as the run progresses it becomes harder to dictate when you actually deal damage. I've had runs where I trip over one enemy and suddenly enemies can't spawn because I simply deal too much damage to let them spawn, and those are the types of runs that have died due to Twisted Elites, plus many more. Decisions like this make me wonder how bad the crunch was for this DLC, because this shouldn't have survived one playtest. That about does it for the 1.0 version of the DLC. Yeah, the stage visuals look good and are well designed, minus my gripes with Helmeth Hatchery being far too vertical, as well as the music banging as always, but those weren't problematic. They were universally praised, so there's not much for me to talk about in that regard. Instead, I felt it important to highlight the things that were bad about the DLC, so the redemption arc makes more sense. To call it underwhelming, even after the bug fixes, would be too nice. No new game modes, barely any new mechanics or interactables, nothing. We got a lot of quality of life with the update, but that can only go so far, especially when the base game itself gets broken. Luckily, we won't have to wait long for the developers to say something.
Oh my god!
Wait! I have an idea.
Okay, but are we sure this will work?
It better.
November 4th brought version 1.35, the final version of Seekers 1.0, and with it a roadmap explaining how they're going to rework the entire DLC. Now, this got clowned on a lot at the time, and yeah, it isn't the most elegant solution. A roadmap to fix an already released full-price DLC definitely isn't the best look, but what else were they supposed to do? Yes, not releasing the DLC as it was would have avoided this issue, but a delay very clearly wasn't an option for them. So, given the circumstances they were in, I really think the roadmap was the best choice for them. It clearly tells the community they admit that they messed up and details how they're going to fix it, with them splitting it into 3 phases. I think the updates were rolled out this way to keep player engagement up while the team worked on the next update. This also gave us a taste of what the team was capable of, definitely leading to them rebuilding their image a lot faster than if they just dropped everything all at once. The incremental fixes would come over the next 6 months, with the first one dropping just a month later on December 10th. The first phase of Seekers 2.0 released on December 10th, and its main goal was to fix the items and elites. The speed and scale of this update was very impressive, setting a good precedent for the rest of the updates. It didn't break much either, instead fixing even more issues along the way. Starting off with the items, the elusive antlers are the reworked version of the antler shield, which now gives 7% movement speed and spawns orbs around the players that give movement speed when collected, giving 12% per stack. I think in the initial teaser for this rework, it also gave barrier, which they later removed. It makes sense, but it's still something that could have been interesting. Spawning for these orbs is also really well implemented, always spawning roughly where the player is looking and pretty close to them. The visuals and overall feedback for this item are just insanely well done, way better than the razor wire at home feel of the previous incarnation. Bolstering Lantern got updated too, with it now increasing attack speed for every ally or enemy in a 20-meter radius. It's basically the focus crystal for attack speed, which makes these two a really good synergy for close range survivors. Warped Echo has been changed to not only give damage reduction on the hit that procs it, but the damage is now split into 3 hits, with only the last one being lethal. This is probably one of my favorite of the reworks because it retains the spirit of the original while still being useful in any run. Chronic Expansion got changed to provide a 3.5% damage buff on every kill and was capped to 10 stacks at base. It also got its audio feedback completely overhauled to the point where I think it feels better than it did before, despite it technically getting a nerf. Knockback Fin got changed to Breaching Fin and even changed rarities, going to an uncommon. Instead of having a random chance to knock enemies up, it went to a guaranteed effect on a cooldown, with you bouncing them up 3 times and dealing additional damage to targets affected by this. This rework also retains the spirit of the original while making it more viable, but I'm still not sure I like it. It can get a bit annoying for melee or projectile survivors to deal with, so while yes, it is better, I still find myself scrapping it more often than not. Noxious Thorns now gives a 10% chance to bleed, as well as transferring debuffs to nearby targets if a defeated target has any. It's an interesting concept that is really strong in any AoE build, almost to the point of feeling far more powerful than most of the other uncommon items. Unstable Transmitter went from probably the most frustrating item to one of the most busted items, with it instead granting you barrier upon activating and also surrounds you with an aura that inflicts bleed and teleports any enemy that gets inside. The kicker is the 45-second cooldown, which would be a problem, but you can reset the cooldown with Blast Shower, completely negating any downside to the item, not to mention snacking the item already decreases the cooldown. Luminous Shot got changed to have a charge system where you need at least 3 charges to activate the Lightning Strike. It also now reduces your secondary cooldown by 20%, making it even easier to build up charges. Again, good rework that keeps the spirit of the original vision while still making it viable. Heading into the legendaries, War Bonds also got a massive change, with it summoning a barrage of missiles when you activate the teleporter. The more gold you have means the more missiles that get fired, with each missile doing 2.5% of the boss's max health per hit. People raved over this item, but to be honest, I never got the hype. If the teleporter boss died before all the missiles were done, it would just start firing them at you, which, while not doing any damage to you, is a really funny mistake, but also highlights my problem with it. If you're going to kill the teleporter boss fast enough, this item does nothing. Growth Nectar now gives 7% stats for each buff for a max of 4 instead of requiring 5 to get any benefit. It's also an overall buff too, with the old only granting 20% and this one granting 28% if you have 4 buffs. The final item to get major changes is Runic Lens, with them cleaning up the description, rest in peace overspill, whatever the hell you meant, cleaning up the overall functionality and having the damage numbers tweaked. The rest of the item changes are fairly minor, so we'll just rapid fire them. Chance Doll's description got rewritten and now displays green particles when it works alongside a green chat message. Sonorous Whisper's drop chance for elites got nerfed to 4% but still guarantees items from bosses. Prairie Breeds got blacklisted from printers and had text added upon removal to make it more clear what exactly it was doing. The free unlock from long-setting altitude is now retained between stages and only increases the cost of items by 50% instead of 100%. Seed of Life now works with equipment drones, and finally, Electric Boomerang no longer applies bleed when holding the sombering equipment, except not really. This does get fixed later on, but the bug remains for this specific patch. Finally, this update also sought to rework the elite types, because if we had to deal with Twisted Elites any longer, I might have finally lost the small amount of sanity I have remaining in my soul. Twisted Elites still latch onto other enemies, but instead any damage dealt to them is converted to charging a crystal. Doing enough damage without killing the elite will launch this crystal at the player, but you can still shoot it down. This is a very welcome change, as it makes this elite type more fair to fight against and doesn't spell the end of a run. Gilded Elites now summon a gold spike below the player that, if hit, will steal their gold and scatter it on the ground, allowing it to be recollected. This is much more manageable, but can also be easy to miss the telegraph when there's a lot going on. Still leagues better than what came before though, no complaints here. Overall, this update was well needed for the game. It rebuilt a lot of faith between the developers and the community, but they still had 2 more updates to nail. It'll be a while between now and the next update, with the developers taking an item balancing feedback and implementing it in the next update, which would primarily fix the False Sun boss fight. We would hear nothing about this update until its release. The second phase of Seekers 2.0 was released on March 4th, 2025, and it sought out to make the False Sun boss fight a lot better. But did it succeed in doing so? Well, it's certainly a better fight than it was previously, but it has a few flaws that are still yet to be addressed. They also introduced some questionable balance decisions, but I want to talk about the False Sun fight because it sure got changed. They improved all of his telegraphs and animations across the board, which was definitely overdue. It feels like you can actually read what the boss is gonna do, but his AI can still feel a bit unpredictable. They made his laser the coolest thing ever, but it's probably the most unfair of his attacks. It comes from the giant Providence statue in the distance instead of coming from the boss himself, but this has perfect tracking no matter what, even if you're hidden behind cover before the laser begins. This laser will absolutely destroy you too, and with the limited cover of the arena, it just makes this attack not very fun to play against. Not to mention, the False Sun is still roaming the arena, spawning enemies and chasing you out of your very limited cover. It also confuses me because, to my knowledge, no other laser in this game has perfect tracking. Every laser in the game has some sort of delay in its tracking, and wow, what do you know, it makes them more fun to play against. Why this wasn't considered for this fight is crazy. But they could still keep the perfect tracking, but not let False Sun attack until the laser's done. It's easily the worst part of the fight, even if visually speaking, it's the coolest thing ever. They also gave False Sun adaptive armor, meaning he won't fall over in 3 seconds anymore. Other than some visual updates to other attacks and his overall scaling being changed, this is all that was really changed. It's easier to see the changes by playing them instead of describing them, so hopefully the on-screen footage did good. These are good changes, and the fight is definitely in a better state, but it's still not on the same level as Mithrix. Still better than Voidling, thankfully. Next up is a controversial set of Void Fields changes. Void Fields have always been a point of contention due to how powerful they are, giving you a free stage worth of loot plus a guaranteed red provided the enemies aren't given a crowbar. They made the timer pause while inside a void cell, which is such a questionable change, I wonder why they even bothered. They also made void fog damage ramp up over time, which just... why? It works on something like Simulacrum because you're always surrounded by a safe area. In an area as big as the Void Fields, if you have low mobility, your run is basically over. Even trying to leave the Void Fields can end your run because the portal doesn't stop the fog damage. So while the game is converting your money to EXP, you're still taking damage and it ramps up fairly fast if you don't have any healing. So if you roll an unlucky item, like crowbars, you either have to suck it up and lose the run by continuing the fields, or you can lose the run by dying to the fog trying to leave. This damage ramp up was far too powerful and made Void Fields a near impossibility for some characters. Finally, they made enemies gain items faster if you took too long to complete a cell, which, again, just why? Was anybody asking for these changes to the fields? Finally, we got some item balance changes that are very much a mixed bag. Some got hit too hard, some barely touched, it's kind of a mess. Unstable Transmitter is now a consumable, similar to Power Elixir, and only grants 35% barrier while also removing its one-shot protection. I understand that this item was broken, but hitting it this hard was too overkill, I think. Making it consumable is perfectly fine, the barrier reduction is even fine, but also removing one-shot protection? Yeah, it's a myth half the time anyway, but it's still better to have than not, especially given the wombo combo of nerfs that was handed out. Antler Shield got the base 7% movement speed removed, which is fine. They could have kept the base 7% buff but removed the stacking of it, but it's fine, I guess. It doesn't ruin the item or anything, just a strange change. Growth Nectar's buff got changed to 4%, which is incredibly welcoming because 7% made things actively worse. Believe it or not, too much movement speed is a very real problem that this item contributed to. They also removed the base stat increase on each stack, which also helps this item to be actually usable. Orbed Echo's damage resist got knocked down to 20%, but the additional hits finally proc items that rely on you taking damage, which is a very nice change. Warbonds got its proc chance nerfed to 0%, and the cost of each missile got increased to 25%. The proc chance nerf felt a bit too unnecessary, but otherwise fine, given how little I really care for this item anyway. Breaching Fin had its damage increase changed to where it now only provides a 10% damage buff, but now gains more damage as you bounce the enemies more, which is a perfectly fine change. Bolstering Lantern's attack speed got nerfed down to 7.5%, making it a far worse version of the Mocha since you still have to be in range of something to get that buff. This is by far one of the most unnecessary nerfs because Lantern felt fine before. To rapid fire these smaller changes, Saunders Whisper's loot chance got rebalanced to favor wide items, Long-Standing Solitude got the gold to EXP ratio rebalanced, and the audio of Chronic Expansion's beeping has been reduced. We also finally, truly, for real this time, fixed Electric Boomerang applying bleed if you have the Solmering equipment, which I will miss. Finally, we got some changes to the new enemies introduced. Halcyon Knight's hitboxes got changed to match his visuals. His whirlwind attack no longer just breaks in half, although, funnily enough, if you kill this enemy during the whirlwind, he can just continue spinning. It's kind of funny, honestly. They also fixed the laser to properly track you instead of just the first shot tracking you. Scorchworm got a reduction in HP and got made to have a more consistent way of getting them out of ground, but this enemy still kinda sucks. I think limiting how long they can stay underground, or even how often they go underground, would be a substantial improvement because despite the improvement to getting them to come up, it doesn't work all the time. But these enemies still have really high damage stats, which just feels unfun to fight. I'm surprised they didn't get nerfed because it feels like one hit is enough to proc an elixir or even outright kill you. The last major change they made was Prime Meridian taking you directly to Stage 4, which is such a funny oversight that they had to fix because before this it would not spawn the Primordial Teleporter on Stage 5, instead forcing you to loop and then spawn the Teleporter on Stage 1. You'd also get cheated out of a full stage of loop before, making you overall weaker, so this is a very good change. They also added a bunch of destructible pillars to the Bazaar, and destroying all of them spawns a green portal, which also guarantees that you can access Path of the Colossus if you didn't get a Halcyon Knight Shrine on Stage 1. That's about it for this update, besides the obvious bug fixes. This update felt mostly fine, barring a few questionable changes, but it's also the most lukewarm of the three updates for me. I don't typically do the False Sun fight due to how out of the way it ends up being, and still has a pretty glaring flaw with the laser attack. Luckily, there's still one more update to talk about, and it's a pretty ambitious one, with it fixing the Survivor's primarily chef, and rounding out the DLC to what it should have been at release. Did they do well? Let's find out. The final phase of Seekers 2.0 was released on May 5th, 2025, and set out to not only bring changes to the new survivors, but introduce new alternate skills for them as well. A very odd exclusion from the original release I'm glad they've rectified. I claimed Seeker as the most polished of the survivors, and seeing as she got the least amount of changes, that judgment seems to still be correct. Meditate can now revive teammates on Endcast after the 7th, making it far more useful than prior. You also now get a self-revive once you get all 7 stacks, which is absolutely busted. Sojourn now increases damage at 500% per tick instead of 400%, which helps with an unlock challenge. Finally, the third hit of Spirit Punch and the Explosion from Meditate now deal 50% and 200% more damage respectively per stack of Tranquility. Moving on to the new skills, Reprieve is the alternate skill to Sojourn and has a ridiculous unlock requirement of wanting you to deal 500,000% damage with Sojourn. Best advice is to just do a command run on Drizzle and stack as many damage items as possible. This ability is similar to Sojourn, but instead of damaging you to increase its damage, it gives you a barrier that, when depleted, will automatically kick you out of the ability and spawn a tornado that sucks enemies in and does 200% damage, as well as healing any allies in the tornado. The ability speeds up as you stay in it, with your turning radius tanking over time to compensate. I actually prefer this over Sojourn, because I wasn't super big on Sojourn initially. The speed is really welcome, and the tornado healing allows you to stay up close, as well as being able to extend the duration of the ability if you can master the turn radius by having more barrier generating items. Palm Blast is the alternative skill to Meditate and has a far better unlock condition, requiring 20 perfect Meditate inputs. Just go into the bazaar and spam the ability until you get it for the easiest route. I'm not as big of a fan of it as Meditate. I think as your run progresses, it's going to be far easier to use. In order to gain stacks of Tranquility, you need to hit at least 3 enemies with the ability, which early on can be a bit rough, but Reprieve can help with this. There's also a bug at launch where it doesn't scale damage properly, which could be clouding my judgment on the ability as I'm writing this before it gets fixed. You also lose revive capabilities with this ability, which is a fair balance change. Chef was a disaster on release, to say the least. It was a big goal of this update to revive him and make him viable, and yet, despite that, I still feel underwhelmed by Chef. Going over the monumental changes to his base kit, his primary now holds 3 stocks with no cooldown. Instead, if you tap the fire button, the cleavers will return to you. You will throw out a cleaver and they will return to you after a short time. You can hold the button down to not only throw all of your cleavers at the same time, but also let them linger in the world and they actually do damage now. Although you have to hold the button down to make them do more damage on recall, which is not really that fun to play with. They also nerfed the damage to compensate for this, which I also don't really agree with. Seer had its animation duration changed to be a lot shorter, but still does the same damage as before. They also fixed the aiming for it while increasing the range, making it far easier to use. Roll now charges significantly faster and has a super jump attached to it. Charging now increases duration and speed as well, something that should have been there on release, but hey, better late than never. Yes, Chef has had its ability refresh removed, which is an odd change to say the least. Other than that, and a cooldown reduction, the skill itself didn't get changed, but the other boosted skills did get some changes. Boosted Dice got a damage increase, Boosted Seer now creates pre-ignited pools of oil upon hitting the ground, and Boosted Roll applies more bleed. Talking about the new skills, Icebox is a frost variant of Seer, with it being my preferred secondary for Chef. The unlock is fairly easy, requiring you to apply 20 stacks of Burn to Mithrix, stack a lot of attack speed and a couple backup mags, and you'll get it easily. If you hit oil with this ability, it will freeze over and apply constant stacks of frost to any enemy touching it, leading it to be insanely powerful as freeze has an insta-kill built in. Yes, Chef transforms this into you shooting out one giant ice cube that freezes whatever enemy it hits. The skill also changes the visuals on Chef, which is a really neat detail. Oil Spill is the alternative to Roll and is unlocked by hitting 5 airborne enemies with 1 activation of Roll. Primordial Cube is your best friend for this one. The ability sends you flying, dropping pools of oil below you. You can activate this 4 total times by hitting the button when you land and can also be used to scale walls. I like this ability, but giving up the movement of Roll is really hard to give up. This ability is busted for AoE, and I want to like it, but giving up Roll is a hard choice because without it I feel so slow. This also leads me to a problem with Chef's kit that I alluded to last time I talked about him. In Risk of Rain Returns, his kit is very simple. Your utilities were your oil generators, your secondary interacted with it, and then you had second helping which augmented your abilities. In this game, however, your oil generators are split between your utility and special, which is a horrible feeling. If you want to use Yes Chef and Roll, you give up oil entirely. Using Oil Spill to me feels worse than using Roll, and I really like running Yes Chef. It's a complicated situation that just knocks the survivor down even more for me, even disregarding the fact I still don't really like his kit in this game. I feel insane for not liking the survivor as much after this rework too, because everybody is so positive about him. He's good, almost certainly better than his original release, but something about him still feels off to me. False Sun has been ever so slightly reined in this update, but he's still mostly busted. They actually reduced his base damage to 12, but increased the scaling on it. A weird change, but it's a change. His primary has been buffed to 450% damage, with the charge swing being nerfed down to 1000% damage and a 1.0 proc coefficient. This was completely justified, as the slam was comically broken. Both of these also got new visual effects, which are leagues better than what they used to be. It feels like the particles match the hitbox now. Lunar spikes were given the agile property, which might be the most impactful change made to them. They also made them faster to shoot and at a more consistent rate, meaning you can dump them significantly faster to gain their benefits. They also got a buff to 200% damage, which is a nice change. Step of the Brother no longer cancels the Charge Slam and Laser of the Father, which is a very nice change. However, I thought this meant you couldn't cancel Laser of the Father at all now, since I typically use the dash to cancel it, but now you can cancel by pressing your primary attack. Finally, Laser Burst got buffed to do 1250% damage and now refills 50% of your Lunar Spikes, which is fantastic because 30% was such an odd number. One of the new abilities, Lunar Stakes, is a much more offensive version of the spikes, and it's glorious. The unlock requirement is a little poorly worded, but you need to gain 40 stacks of Lunar Spikes through growth, totaling to 44 since you start off with 4. Each stack of stakes count as 2 spikes, and they pierce enemies, calling down a lightning strike when it hits an enemy and the ground. These are insanely powerful, making them my new preferred secondary for False Sun, especially combined with Laser Burst restoring one of them. Meridian's Will is the alternate utility skill, which has an extremely annoying unlock, requiring you to have Aurelionite kill Mithrix. Try to pick up as few damage items as possible and go to Gilded Coast as often as you can, since stacking her item will increase her damage. Moving on to the ability itself, I don't really care for it. It deals fine damage and even vortexes enemies near you, allowing you to take advantage of your passive being tripled. However, I miss the vertical distance you could get with the base utility, not to mention the 10-second cooldown on Meridian's Will. Add the buffs to Steps of the Brother, and it's hard for me to want to use this new skill, although it's really cool how all of his skills are inspired by his boss fight. We got some other changes across the game too, like lowering the Void Fog damage and ramp up speed in the Void Fields, which is so much better than what it used to be. Ideally, the ramp up would be removed altogether, but this is a fine compromise. They also reverted enemies gaining items if you took too long, instead giving them items when you start a cell. Elusive Antlers spawns an additional 3 orbs per stack instead of 1, making up for the loss of the base movement speed. Bolstering Lantern got rebuffed to 10% attack speed, and instead got the radius increase removed, which is a far healthier change than what it was prior. Finally, Unstable Transmitter got buffed to give 60% barrier now. I'm still personally salty over how hard it got hit, but this is fine. Overall, these updates put Seekers in the state it should have been from the start. However, despite the improvements, Seekers of the Storm still feels a tad underwhelming for me personally, at least compared to Survivors of the Void. Maybe I'm still burnt from the horrible launch, or having to wait 8 months for the DLC to be what it should have been, but whatever the reason is, I just don't find Seekers of the Storm to be worth the $15 price tag. Yes, the DLC is miles better than when it was released, and I'd be a fool to not recommend it. It's just for me personally, I still feel slightly underwhelmed by everything. I'm still not sold on some of the implementation of the new content, primarily the Path of the Colossus, as well as how little it feels this DLC adds compared to the previous one. Maybe I'm just tired of this game and need to take a step back, which is very likely. Maybe I just feel uneasy with the immediate announcement of a new DLC days after Phase 3. It could be a multitude of things, and yet, in reality, it could just be a small couple things. DLC 3 was announced mere days after the Phase 3 update released, and something about it feels strange? I think the development team really turned the tide with Seekers of the Storm, publicly admitting to the expansion's shortcomings and going the length to fix it and make it worth it. There's still some bugs with the game, but overall, the game is in a much better state than it used to be. However, despite that, and despite the new DLC being praised by people who have played it, I'm still concerned for this DLC and the overall future of the game. I want to doubt that the DLC will ship with a game-breaking update that takes months to get resolved. I don't want to see another one of my favorite games being destroyed with one update and have the fixes take months to come to fruition. However, I feel it isn't too fair to be doom posting over a DLC we barely know any info about, but I'm very cautious going into this release. I'll be keeping up with it as we get new news, and I'll certainly be playing it, but I'm still uneasy about it all. But for now, I'd like to thank you all for watching, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.
Wow, I cannot believe that worked.
Yeah, me neither.
So, what are we gonna do now?
You forgot about the next DLC already?
Wait, what?
Oh, you gotta be
be
fucking kidding me.
kidding me.